I learned early on that little memories are the one that mean the most. Simple things. Sunday afternoons at the craft store with my mother. Wandering air-conditioned aisles prematurely filled with Halloween decorations. Sunset drives to the grocery store where I struggled to absorb every detail of the fiery sky. Constructing driftwood castles on the beach, pleasantly aware of my sunburn and wind-tangled hair. Desert sunrises, sprinklers in summer. Craft time in the cluttered family room. Dog kisses, cat cuddles. Tree branches casting shadows upon moonlit snow. Rereading my favorite book while night insects sing and evening deepens to true night. These are not important memories, but they are the memories that make me who I am. They are the kinds of memories my daughter never had, because she was born with a severely damaged brain and a deformed body that made the damage even worse. So I shared my memories with her. Every night, as she stared at the ceiling with unfocused eyes, I cupped her cheek and told her my memories. I told her about the cold afternoons at the pizza parlor where I sat in a corner with breadsticks and a book as snow clouds rolled in. I told her about a lightning storm where the sky turned murky green and bruise-colored clouds swirled over the mountains. I told her about the cache of sea glass I uncovered in my backyard and how the crows flew down and stole it all before I could even find a box. The death of a child was a horrific thing under circumstance. But when an older child dies, or even when a normal baby dies, there's a tiny sliver of solace. People remember these children. The kindergartner has friends and classmates and cousins who adore him. The 11-year-old wrote poetry and taught her little brothers the scientific names for all the wildflowers in their backyard. The 13-year-old had friends, family, schoolmates. People remember them. They're remembered because they were alive. They spoke, they moved, they thought, they learned, they made their own memories, and in turn, they live on in the memories of others. But children like mine cannot make their own memories. Children like mine will never recognize the scent of a craft store on a summer afternoon. They will never see the lightning storms against a breathtaking mosaic of green and purple clouds. They will never build driftwood castles on windy beaches. Very few people remember children like mine with anything but sadness and revulsion. This is because children like mine are not quite people, at least as far as other people are concerned. They are tragedies. They are mistakes. They are horrors. Parents are the only one who remember these children with love. We remember bedtimes and bath times and what it is like to read to babies who cannot hear or see or think. We remember the interminable days in the hospital, and we remember the good days with something approaching religious rapture. Our children cannot remember these things, but we remember them for them. We are their memory keepers. In this way, we live for them. We keep them alive, if only in our hearts. But that isn't enough of a life. It isn't enough of a memory. So I told my daughter my memories, and I hope that somewhere in her malformed brain, they would take root and grow in ways we don't yet understand. I hope that somehow she would be able to live my memories, borrow my life and live it all inside her head. I felt so guilty that she never had her own life, never made her own memories. That is why I tried to give her mine. When I decided to go through with the pregnancy, some people told me I was brave. Others told me I was stupid. I felt neither brave or stupid. Mostly I felt annoyed and selfish. I knew early on that she would be born disabled and deformed, but she was all I had left of my husband. If there was even a sliver of a chance that she would survive, I needed to try. The mere knowledge that she existed made me so happy. And how bad could it actually be? Either she'd die within a few days or live a short life without awareness or pain. A permanent baby doll. It wouldn't be easy for me, but easiness was not part of my equation. Nothing has ever been easy, and I did not expect that to change with a child. Of course I second-guessed my decision when she was born. She looked nightmarish. Not even human. Like the jump scare photos I used to email to my friends back in junior high. How, I thought, how can someone look like this and not feel pain? What have I done? I don't think there is a word for the mingling of panicked regret and overwhelming love. But that is what I felt. Like I'd made the most monumental mistake in the history of motherhood, but wouldn't undo it even if I could. My daughter died at 18 months. Nobody was sad but me. "You gave her a good life," they said. "You did everything you could. At least she didn't know the difference. You showed her love, which is something a lot of people wouldn't do." It's a terrible thing, terrible. But at the same time, well, it's got to be a little bit of a relief, doesn't it? It was a relief, yes. But it was bitter. More bitter than sorrow. More bitter than despair. More bitter than suffering itself. But I didn't know how to explain this. Not when they were acting like I'd done it all. Birthed her, cared for her, protected her, loved her. For brownie points. To be a martyr. To comply with my religion. To gain sympathy or admiration. They didn't understand. I think they didn't want to. I didn't want a funeral. I didn't want a mortician or a coffin. I wanted to cremate her and put her in one of those biodegradable urns that come with seeds, the kind where your ashes fertilize a tree. But when the time came to cremate her, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. Because society used to burn murderers and witches. 400 years ago, my daughter, my poor, deformed, deaf, thoughtless, sightless daughter, would have been called a demon. They might have burned her back then simply because of how she looked. Because burning was punishment. Burning was annihilation. And what if something went wrong at the crematorium? What if they lost her ashes? What if I got someone else's? And had no way to be near her again? I knew this was not rational, but my daughter spent her short life deformed on the receiving end of revulsion and fear. I felt like cremating her, obliterating her physical form, would be akin to agreement. A final statement to the effect of, "You were wrong to be born like this. You were wrong to make the world look at you. We will fix that now." When she was first born, one of my greatest fears was that she would have cognition, that she would have enough awareness to know that she was ugly. She had died without that knowledge. I wanted her to be dead without it too. It makes no sense, I knew that. But even so, I paid for full honors, a shiny white coffin, a mortician to paint her, a flower-choked viewing room to present her, and a plot in the cemetery just over a tree-choked hill, a mere 15-minute walk from my front door. It was the only way I could prove to the world that my daughter was a beautiful blessing to me, and that she made me happy. The night after the burial, I took 4 sleeping pills and dreamed of my daughter. She was in her frozen casket, quivering as 6 feet of impossibly heavy earth pressed down on the fragile wood. It was cold, damp, and horribly dark. Somewhere beyond the confines of her coffin, worms squirmed and insects chittered, planning how to breach her coffin and consume her remains. My daughter was sick with confusion and fear. She had never been frightened before. She had never been capable of feeling fear. But now she could, and she was terrified. She hated the dark, and more than that, she hated bugs. But then the dream took a strange turn. The coffin opened up, emitting a swath of blinding light. Before my eyes, the silk-lined casket flickered into a dirty, rusted freezer. My baby began to cough, only she wasn't my baby. She was a little girl with tangled hair and scabby rash-covered skin. The light swept away. A flashlight, I realized. And holding the flashlight, a woman. The girl, who was not my baby, whined and recoiled. And then I woke up. I was in my backyard, curled around the rocking chair where I'd sat with my daughter every day, whispering memories while I cupped her cheek against my shoulder. Even if she couldn't feel anything, I wanted the sun to touch her face, wanted the scent of flowers to envelop her. I wanted wind to caress her skin. I wanted rain to patter on her head. I wanted cold fog to brush her fingers. I thought these things would give extra dimension to the memories I shared with her. Even if her mind couldn't understand, perhaps her body would. My landlord gave me the rocking chair. He planted flower beds too. He couldn't look at my daughter without wincing, but I could forgive that, because he always tucked his finger under her limp hand, mimed a handshake, and said, "Good morning, beautiful." In stark contrast to his acceptance was the little girl who lived down the road. She came several days in a row to oogle through the fence, watching my baby with sick fascination. Once I called to her. "Hi, sweetie. What's your name?" "You have a scary baby," she blurted. My heart lurched. That isn't kind to say. "So, it's still a scary baby." Then she burst into tears and ran away. I never saw her again. I worry about her sometimes. So small, probably not even 5, and wandering the boonies without anyone to watch her. But I never worried long. I always had too much to worry about, too much to remember, because I am a memory keeper. And in that moment, as I lay crumpled around my rocking chair, those memories crushed me. There were too many to hold, too many to keep. I lost control of them, and they ate me alive. I held onto the rocking chair as if to a life raft and wept for hours. I didn't sleep for a week. Not because I wasn't exhausted, but because I couldn't bear to dream of my poor baby closed up in the cold darkness with grave worms. But on the 3rd night, my body gave out and I fell asleep. I dreamed of my daughter, of course. I was in her coffin with her, holding her tightly and shivering. I was so cold in there, paralyzingly cold. My poor baby. I'd made her cold forever when I could have burned her instead. I pressed her to my chest, gritting my teeth when a small, wet body of worms curled against my hands. Then, for the first time, alive or dead, my daughter spoke.
"Tell me your good memories."
"Why?" I asked.
"I found a friend who needs them, but I can't remember how to share them."
I am her memory keeper. So I told her everything. Tree shadows on moonlit snow, sun-glittering waves creeping toward a driftwood castle, bounding puppies and adventurous cats, vibrant sunsets and snowy afternoons in the pizza parlor. When I finished, my daughter said,
"Please let go. I need to leave."
"Where are you going?" I asked. Before she could answer, I woke up. Though my house was heated to near-tropical temperatures, my bones ached with cold. Goose flesh covered my skin. Even to the tip of my nose was icy cold, with that smooth, shiny feeling it gets in winter. I wanted to stay home and hold on to the dream, to convince myself that in death, my daughter had gained everything denied her in life, that she was alive and had come back to me. But to do that, I would have to think. Thinking was too painful. So instead I turned on the television and sat there long after nightfall. For many nights after that, my daughter came to me in my dreams. Every time I held her. Every time she asked to hear my memories. I shared them gladly. As long as I ignored the cramped cold and the wet worms, I could pretend she never died. This went on for weeks. It was bliss. Bitterly relieved bliss. And then the dream changed. As always, I was in my daughter's casket, dark and cold and terribly damp, with mold already blooming on the silk lining. My daughter was nowhere to be found. She was gone, like she'd never even existed. I was trapped and alone, curled in a tiny coffin as worms crawled over my skin. I woke after dark, disoriented and terrified. I could still feel the wet worms inching over my face. Grief overtook me. Memories broke their bounds and ate me once again. Glittering tides, austere hospital rooms, lightning storms, and cats in craft stores. I sobbed and paced and collapsed, and eventually crawled. Sometime later, I found myself under my kitchen table. I curled up and stared at the tile until the thick golden light of sunrise spilled across it like syrup. Another night gone. I didn't know if that was a blessing or a curse. I slept as much as I could, struggling to find my daughter again, to hold her and tell her my memories again. But she eluded me. I only ever dreamed of her empty casket. The emptiness was even worse than the cold darkness and the grave worms. I couldn't stand it. It was too accurate a reflection of my life. It was too much. So instead of sleeping, I stayed awake so long that I started seeing things. Minor at first, ladybugs and doves and a well-loved teddy bear with a threadbare nose, a missing eye, and the name Bailey stitched on its belly. But all at once, The hallucinations subsumed reality. I found myself running helplessly through a raging lightning storm, dodging lightning strikes and ominous shadows between the trees. I clung to an overturned driftwood castle as the tide propelled it into the open sea. Dogs whined and cats yowled. My favorite book caught fire in my hands, while a teddy bear shook its head and sobbed. And somewhere in the distance, a child wept. I dropped to my knees and covered my eyes. The deafening maelstrom, storm and tide and wailing animals slowly faded, but the child continued to cry. After a while, a wet, garbled hiss cut through the weeping.
I can't,
the child whispered. A girl, I thought. A little girl with a sore throat.
I told you already. No one knows I'm here.
The wet gobbling came again. It made my hair stand on end. It sounded like a monster. A slithering monstrosity that crept through your walls while you slept.
She'll just hate me.
The girl uttered a hoarse sob.
Because I screamed at you.
The monster spoke again. This time, under the wet gurgling, I could make out the words.
No, she won't. Real mothers never hate children. Mine does.
The girl dissolved into weeping. Finally, I dared to open my eyes. I was in a cramped space. Mud sluiced up between my fingers, soaking my clothing. Pale roots hung from the walls. A few yards away, curled up on the driest spot in the place, was a little girl with scabby rash-covered skin. Propped up beside her was my daughter, rotten and limp. Tiny hands and feet curled and withered so that they looked like chicken feet. But there was no mistaking her. Her dear, familiar, deformed head, and her distinctive little body. It was her. She was here. And she was talking.
That's because she isn't a real mother. My mother is a real one.
My baby's lips moved. Her wet, clouded eyes rolled in the girl's direction and then in mine.
She's looking at us now. Because she's dead like you.
The girl shifted. She wore a dirty t-shirt patterned with ladybugs. A cheap charm bracelet hung from her bony wrist. Cracked plastic doves hung from it, clattering together.
No,
my daughter said.
She's alive. But she gave me all her memories, so her memories are mine.
The little girl sobbed and reached for her teddy bear. Though soaking wet and coated with mud, I recognized it anyway. Threadbare nose, missing eye, with the name Bailey stitched on its belly. My daughter persisted.
And I told you all the memories too. That means we're all sort of the same person now. That's why she could see us.
The little girl's lip quivered. Her face was badly swollen. Puffy ligature marks stretched around her neck. Tears leaked from her bruised eyes and dripped down her crooked nose.
She won't like me. I'm not like you. I'm bad. I'm very bad,
my baby assured her. The girl gingerly wiped her face, wincing as she touched swollen flesh.
You're not as bad. Just scary.
She smiled weakly.
Scary baby.
I blinked. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my daughter's coffin, and she was in my arms, soft and somehow pulpy, like a rotted fruit. It was terribly cold. I could barely breathe.
Do you remember her?
My daughter asked. Even though it was dark, I could see her. Discolored lips and flickering tongue formed the words flawlessly.
She used to come and stare at me because she knew I was a monster.
What are you? I whimpered.
Bad.
My daughter's hand pressed against my skin, pushing like a nursing kitten.
I was always bad, but they never burned me. They only ever drowned me.
Her little fist moved faster, pushed deeper.
They dropped me into wells and rivers.
Faster and faster, so hard it was painful. A volley of tiny punches.
I hate it here. I only find sad friends, and I have to make them happy. But I never make them happy because I never have enough time.
You made me happy, I said.
I always come in a body that can't be alive. The not alive hurts. It hurts so much. The only way out is to make a sad person happy, but I never make them happy. I hate it. Why am I always in a body that can't be alive?
You made me happy, I repeated.
It hurts so much that I die to escape. But I never escape for long. I drift like a leaf in a lightning storm, or a stick on the sea, until I find someone who is too sad and too hurt to live long. I always hate to watch them die. I always have to come back in another body that can't be alive.
Suddenly, the world broke apart. I was my daughter, and I was me, and I was the broken, bruised little girl in the muddy cellar. I hated it. I hated the cold, and I was so scared of the dark. Then I was in a rusty box, a freezer, watching a grinning woman empty jars of bugs across the threshold. Cockroaches and spiders and crickets, a glistening cascade. I hated it. I was afraid of the tiny hard space, and more than anything, I was afraid of the bugs. Suddenly, I was somewhere else. A bare room with a single mattress and a sofa. Dread filled me, molten and heavy. Then someone stuffed a cloth in my mouth. While I choked, they wrapped a blindfold over my eyes and cinched it so tightly it burned my cheeks. "If you're going to run and tell," a lady hissed, "then you're not allowed to see." Before I could make sense of her words, she threw me onto the mattress while a man laughed. I hated it, because I was afraid of the dark, and afraid of the bed, and afraid of men. A moment later, or maybe an hour, or a day, or an eternity, I curled up in the cellar mud again, sobbing as gently as I could, so as to not move my body, because every part of me hurt. I hurt too bad to be afraid of the dark or the bugs. Then I was in a bathtub, clean and glistening white. Someone grabbed my head and dunked me under, holding me until I helplessly sucked lungfuls of water. The world flickered, and I was hanging from a wall in a white hallway. It was hard to breathe. Whenever I sank too low, my lungs seemed to collapse in on themselves, so I mustered what little energy I had and kicked my feet until I hit the opposite wall. I braced myself and strained upward. For just a minute, a blessed minute, the pressure on my chest eased. Then my quivering legs gave out and I tumbled down again. My feet hurt, I realized. They felt open. As my vision gave out, I saw that the wall ahead of me was covered in faint, bloody footprints. I'd done this so often that the soles of my feet were raw. I woke up crying. I shot up with a bone-deep shudder. For a terrible second, I thought I was still in my daughter's coffin. But no, I was in the rocking chair, and it was snowing. It dusted my hair and shoulders, glistening like ground diamonds. Something was in my lap. I looked down, half expecting to see my daughter. It was a teddy bear. A mud-encrusted teddy bear, with a missing eye and the name Bailey stitched into its belly. I screamed. A flock of quail exploded into the air. A crow scolded me loudly. I didn't care. Tears stung my eyes, burning for just an instant before freezing. I shrieked again. Then I stood up and nearly collapsed. My legs were numb and asleep, like nerveless stumps. I staggered back into the house, taking care not to let my toes bend under my feet. When I got inside, I slammed the door and sat down, wincing as sensation prickled its way back into my legs. My daughter had been dead for 49 days. I slept badly that night. I dreamed of the funeral parlor with its bundles of flowers and thick, migraine-inducing perfume. I was looking for my daughter. There'd been a mistake. I had to find her before the burial. She couldn't be buried. She needed to burn. I needed to find her before they buried her. At some point, I realized I was curled on my side, crying. I didn't remember waking up. I only knew I wasn't asleep anymore. I rolled over. Horror exploded into my heart as cold, wet silk and squirming worms pressed against my face. I screamed and tried to sit up. The lid of my daughter's coffin hit my head and knocked me back.
I wish you'd burned me,
my daughter said mournfully. Bugs crawled across my shoulder and spun up over my daughter's face. I tried to ignore them. I couldn't give in to panic. If I did, I might never escape.
I can't help my friend. She's about to die, but I don't want her to die. If she dies, I'll have to come back in a body that can't live.
She uttered a sob.
I have to hurt again, and again, and again, and again, and again.
I licked my lips. The tip of my tongue touched a worm. It took everything in me not to scream. Where does she live?
I don't know.
What's her name?
I don't know.
What do you mean?
I don't know. I don't remember names. I don't even know mine.
Okay. I struggled to think. Can she write?
She has no paper.
On impulse, I dug my finger into the coffin lining and tore away a huge, ragged swath of silk lining. Tell her to write on this. Write her name and her address, and I promise I will help her. My daughter looked at me miserably, with a kind of bleak malice I could barely comprehend.
Do I make you happy?
Yes. And I woke up again. I waited 4 hours. 4 hours had to be long enough to write a note. It had to be. So at 4 p.m., I downed a sleeping pill. For the first time in years, I dreamed of nothing. Just blissful, empty, sensationless nothing. Soft darkness. I woke with something in my hand. It felt smooth and somehow degraded. I looked down. It was a tattered scroll of white silk. Good. The girl was real after all. And she'd written the note. I unraveled it and blinked tiredly, struggling to make sense of the crooked letters upon it. They were stiff and reddish-brown. Blood. The girl had written this in her own blood. Of course. I'd given her something to write on, but nothing to write with. How had I been so stupid?
Scary Baby says you will help me. All her memories belong to you. They have already helped me, so I hope you will help me too. I'm Kaylee. I do not know my last name. I had a sister named Bailey buried in my yard. My house is by yours. It is yellow with a red van and purple flowers. I got cut open. I'm so sorry for saying your baby looks scary. She's my best friend now, but I hurt her feelings when I said that. I'm very sorry. Please help me now.
I knew exactly which house she meant. It was my next-door neighbor's. I could see it through my window. I called the police. By way of explanation, I lied and told them I'd heard an altercation. When I looked out my window, I saw a bloodied little girl running into the yard. Before I could check on her, a man dragged her back inside. Just a few minutes later, sirens blazed their way up the roads. Cops, ambulances, fire trucks. The ambulance left quickly, but the rest remained for many hours. By the time a cop came to talk to me, it was already morning. He looked exhausted and sick.
Ma'am,
he said.
Please sit down.
I sat. He looked out the window toward my neighbor's house. He had puffy red bags under his eyes. Tears dribbled down and caught in the creases. He wiped them quickly.
Your daughter died recently, didn't she?
Yes. His face twisted. He covered his mouth and nodded.
We found her body next door.
He gestured helplessly.
The little girl next door had your daughter's body. We don't know how yet, but when we found her, she was holding it. Her, like your daughter was a doll.
The cop explained everything with agonizing slowness. It turned out one of the responding deputies was a member of my church, and he immediately recognized my daughter's distinctive body. They dispatched units to the cemetery. My daughter's grave appeared undisturbed, but someone had made a small tunnel near the grave marker. They bored a hole in her casket and stole her. And somehow or other, her corpse ended up in the arms of my neighbor's horrifically abused daughter. The girl's name was Kaylee. She was comatose by the time the police responded. The case made the local papers, but didn't travel beyond the borders of our county. I was surprised for a little while when I looked up crime statistics and realized the vast majority of crimes against children, kidnapping, abuse, murder, never get attention. They kept my daughter for several weeks because her body apparently had evidentiary value. While I waited, I went ahead and bought one of those bio-urns. And when the coroner finally released her back to me, I had her cremated. On the day my daughter burned, Kaylee woke up. Several weeks later, I received a call from her caseworker.
She'd like to meet you,
she said.
if you're able.
I was able. She came to see me on a bright, bitterly cold afternoon. Old snow coated the ground. The sky was clear, imbued with that pale, fiery orange that seems particular to mountain winters. The barren branches of trees cast eerie shadows against the snow. Wood smoke perfumed the air, reminding me of 100 evenings spent by the fireplace while my mother read to me. The girl cut a pathetic scene. tiny and somehow shriveled, with the unmistakable slackness of someone who's been unconscious for a very long time. She was on crutches, and several of her fingers were missing, but the bruises around her eyes had faded. Her face was no longer swollen, and the scabby rash had disappeared. The caseworker settled her onto my sofa, then drifted into the kitchen to give us a semblance of privacy. Once she was out of sight, the girl smiled shyly.
I'm glad I get to see you again.
There was something familiar in her voice. Underneath the chirpy excitement was something else, a wet sort of raspiness that made me think of the frozen coffins and rotted white silk. So am I said. She took my hand. It was so different from what I remembered. Bigger, smoother, properly formed, except for her missing fingers. She lifted my hand experimentally, as if weighing it. Then she placed it against her cheek. Memories flooded me. Memories of 1,000 afternoons that I'd cupped my daughter's cheek just like this. A painful lump formed in my throat.
Do I still make you happy?
She whispered. I nodded as tears brimmed and fell. It's true. It always has been true, and it will always be true. Maybe she is a monster. Maybe she is a horror. But whatever else she is my daughter, and she makes me very happy.